Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and in this episode we're going to do the final bits and pieces to get Harry to the dyno. Alright, so last episode on Harry, you saw me playing around. Mrs. Jeff was driving the car and I was playing around with the other exhaust that I built. Actually, in that video with Mrs. Jeff, just to clear things up, a lot of people thought I was running with the new exhaust, and no, I've been running with the old exhaust while I was waiting for the heat shielding stuff to come in for the rear bumper, because I didn't want to burn the fiberglass. So I've been using the old bumper, the old exhaust, and to be honest, at this stage, the old exhaust sounds better, and I'm sort of quite disappointed with the other exhaust anyway. A lot of you also asked to hear it at wide open throttle, and again, I haven't even heard it out at wide open throttle. I haven't actually taken it out for a major test drive. And to be honest, I don't know whether it's really going to make any real difference to me, because it's the low end stuff. If it's quiet at the low end, then that's good, and loud at the top end. That's what I want anyway, which is what this current one sounds like. It just doesn't look very pretty. I was really hoping I would have it raucous and loud at the bottom end when I want it, but then most of the time it's quiet. If it's quiet at the bottom end and loud at the top end, well, that's perfect really anyway. So that is on the back burner until I rethink it. I was just sort of more worried that this may be restricting power. So I've got that to try out when I do the final tune. And that is what we're all about today, is getting a few things sorted out, getting ready for the final tune. And one of those things that I need to add to this car is a map sensor. So currently the tune on this car is done via throttle position sensor and air inlet temperature. That's how it's mapped at the moment. It's difficult to do map sensor, so manifold absolute pressure, I think is what it is, when you've got individual throttle bodies, because basically it's taking a vacuum reading between the throttle body and the inlet of the engine. And if you've got a plenum chamber, like on the Ferrari, for example, you've got a big area of vacuum when between the throttles and the inlet. On these, because the throttle butterflies are there and the inlet is right there, there's so little variation that it's hard to get much of a reading. Let me take you through what I'm going to do on this. I think it's still worthwhile for tuning purposes. It's still worthwhile getting the map sensor in there, and we're going to do that now. So let's have a look. All right, so the Link ECU actually has its own internal map sensor. So basically what that does is it can correct for barometric pressure. So if you go up into at high elevation where the air is thinner, obviously the tune is going to be different, and the internal map sensor will actually adjust for that. And that's actually built into the ECU itself. But to actually get it for the engine, that is where an external one comes in, and that is actually what this is. This is, I think it's a Bosch part. I got this from Raceworks. They sorted me out with that. And also, what I need for this car is, obviously there is only one input for this. So what we're going to be doing is running this really cool little unit that Raceworks set me up with. And this is a distribution block, so a vacuum distribution block. So basically we're going to take vacuum lines from each throttle body, and all 6 of them will all come into here and give one collective vacuum signal that I'll connect from this to the map sensor, and that is what we're going to set up now. So it should be reasonably straightforward. There are little ports already on these RHD individual throttle bodies. So I'm going to go through now, and I went and tracked down barb fittings that are hopefully the right size. So let's see if we can actually fit the barb fittings and get some lines going to the distribution block. Okay, so you can see down here, there's one of these tubes coming from each of the bases of the throttle bodies. It's hard to sort of film in there. And then they all come through and meet up at this distribution block. So this sort of collects all the vacuum together, and then I've plugged it into this map sensor, which you can barely see it here, but it's in behind the throttle body. That is now mounted in there, so that is all ready to go. It just needs to be plugged and wired into the ECU, which is actually probably the hard bit. So down in behind the seat, I actually hid all these wires underneath the carpet. I haven't cut them off because I still know that I might need bits and pieces, so they're sort of just going to stay hidden and coiled up for the time being. And at the moment, I am looking for a couple of these wires for the map sensor that I've got to send through. So I've identified these wires. It's time to pull them out and then start feeding them back through and get them back into the engine bay and in with the rest of the loom. Okay, so my wiring is now done. I've wired up the map sensor into the ECU, ready to be tuned, and I've made a loop here. This is the extra wires, which is for something else I'm going to tackle next. All right, so when I was up the top, I actually ran a few more wires down under the car, and this is for another sensor. This car has not got any form of digital speed sensor. Basically what I want to do is I want to get a speed sensor signal, and I need to somehow measure what speed at least the axle is spinning. And I sort of thought about a bunch of different ways, and what I came up with was ended up getting a Hall effect sensor from Raceworks. And what this does is, this is the same that you use on the crank to measure crank position. And basically what it is, it's got magnets in it, and it can sense the magnetic field as a piece of metal gets close to this. So what I want to do is I want to make a bracket up to mount the Hall effect sensor so it can pick up the bolts for the drive shaft. So that's my plan, is to make a drive shaft bolt pickup point with the Hall effect sensor. But the issue on this particular car is that it only has 4 drive shaft bolts and it has 2 dowel pins. So because they're not an evenly spaced number, they really need to be evenly spaced. So what I'm going to do is, I got a couple more M10 bolts. These are a bit shorter than the existing ones. I'm going to turn them down and make them as a spike that I can put in with some Loctite to lock them into place, and so basically filling up those 2 extra spaces with the same size heads, so that I get an even 6-point signal to work as my speed signal for the car, because this is going to be a road trip car, and my plan is to get a speed sensor signal, and that means that my the Link ECU will be able to then run a cruise control. And for long road trips, cruise control is a great idea. So that is what I'm trying to set up now, is trying to make up a cruise control system. Alright, so as usual when I'm working on the lathe, it seems to take me a long time to do anything, but basically I took these M10 bolts and I turned them down into a thinner section. I worked out a roughly 6.5 mil is the size I need to fit inside of the dowels that are already in those holes. And I put a little taper on the end so that these should be able to hammer in and sit in and be nice and snug in that section. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually weld in, put a little bit of weld inside the holes of these so that I can't fit a socket in it, so that I know which ones are the ones that don't need to be undone when I pull the axle out. So let's get the welder out, weld these up, and then I should be able to put these into the car. All right, so I got on the TIG and I welded a little nub into the end of each one, and then I've gone through with the yellow paint marker and completely painted the ends of these. So hopefully some of it is still going to be visible in the future when I go to potentially try and take this apart. Just all in an effort to notify me of which ones are the ones that actually are fake and which ones are the ones that are actually holding the axles onto the car. So now I'm going to stick these on. I'm going to cover them in Loctite, and I'm going to hammer them in, and hopefully that's enough to keep them into space. They're going to be pretty solid in there anyway, even without the Loctite, but I think just a little bit of firming up, and then hopefully we have 6 nice even points all the way around the axle for that Hall effect sensor to be able to pick up on to give us a signal that can translate into speed. All right, that was a bit of trimming and sort of tweaking to get them to fit right, but I now have my 6 evenly spaced M10 bolt heads, which hopefully will be a clear enough signal for my Hall effect sensor to give me a speed signal. Yes, there is another way I could go. I could try and get a custom-made disc around the edge with some teeth out of it that I could actually bolt in the gap. That would work, but it means getting something custom-made, which may be what I need to do if this doesn't work. But at this stage, I am pretty happy that that hopefully should do the job. So let's now see how I'm going to go about mounting up my Hall effect sensor. I need to, my loose plan is that I have my framework here that I set up for my clutch. I'm going to try and make a mount off of that framework to hold my Hall effect sensor against the bolt heads. All right, so I've done a lot of sort of backwards and forwards trying to work out how I'm going to actually mount this sensor up here. So the sensor is, it comes with a mount, or Raceworks supplied a mount for it anyway. And what I came up with is I sort of got a piece of box section. What I'm trying to do is mount it off of this framework. So I've got a piece of box section with a little mounting plate. There's another piece of box section that I welded onto the side of it. And that fits up in here like so, and I'll be able to weld this to the original plate, and then I can mount the sensor up, and it's the right spacing for the sensor to be sitting nicely in line with our wheel bolts. So the next job is I'm going to mark onto this, this face exactly where I need to put the mounting screws for the sensor itself, and I want to make it so it swings so that I can actually adjust the spacing and get it so it will do the job. All right, you can see there that that is a sensor mounted. I've just tacked it all into place, and that is getting a nice close reading to the bolts. So fingers crossed that's the way to go. So now all I need to do is wire it up with the wires that I've got here to the wires on the sensor itself. So let's start putting in a Deutsch plug and getting some wires tucked up out of the way. Okay, so you can see here I put the Deutsch connector on the end of the sensor itself to plug and unplug as necessary, and these are the wires that I ran down from the engine bay. The more I'm learning about these sensors and stuff, the simpler it's becoming, or wiring the ECU. Now I've sort of got my head around it. It's actually not as big of a scary mystery as it once was. I mean, I look at the mess of wires going into the bulkhead connector up in the engine bay, and it's really quite straightforward if you take it one at a time. It's really not complicated. I mean, these wires here, there's a sensor power, an 8-volt sensor power. There's a sensor ground, and then on here is just the actual signal wire itself. So there's just 3 wires. It's quite straightforward. So yeah, so I'm going to put some Raceworks heat shielding over the top of this now, and put the thing in, and we should be able to tuck this up out of the way and move on to the inside of the car. Okay, so now I have my speed sensor set in the car. I still don't know if it works or not, but either way, I'm going to need a way to actually set and manage the cruise control. And that's where a mate, Terry, gave me his cruise control stalk from his I think it's an SC based hot rod he's got. And so this is obviously a factory part. I don't know whether it's going to fit with my dash. I haven't even pulled it apart yet to see how it actually bolts in, but at least it is going to be in keeping with the car. So I'm quite happy that I'm going to use this and not some weird buttons on the dash. So thank you very much, Terry. But before I get stuck into it, I need to try and work out what the positions do and what each wire does. So it's got 4 wires coming out of it, 4 pins. For starters, I can see one of them is brown, and knowing 911s, brown is usually a ground. I'm going to connect up the ground to my power probe and then see if I can work out what each movement does and which wire is attributed to which movement of this stalk. So I've worked out the outputs. That's quite simple. So now I need to translate that into signals into the ECU. So let's now see if we can mount this into the car. Okay, so I managed to bolt that stalk on very easily. It all fits in, even though this is an older car, it didn't come with it. That was quite simple. The only thing I need to do now is to notch out the side of my sort of binnacle shroud to accept my cruise control stalk. All right, well, now I have my cruise control switch installed. What I've done is I've actually wired onto the ECU a Deutsch plug, connecting up 4 of the digital inputs, and I've now wired up another end of a Deutsch plug. So I'm going to run these from the ECU now under the carpet up to the front of the car, and then we should be able to connect up these 4 plugs. And basically what they're going to do is I've got there's the 3 functions of the switch, which is going to be to set, to cancel, and to resume the cruise control. And the 4th one is the brake switch. So this will be connected up to the brake light so that if you hit the brake, then the cruise control cancels, because you don't want runaway cruise control. And that means that we should have all of everything in place for the cruise control to work. It just is a matter of getting in touch with Adam at Link. He can enable it in the ECU and do the settings, because it's something, it's not as simple as just connecting it up, because you have to set up all the ramp rates and all the rest of it, of how fast it accelerates and changes speed when speed fluctuates. You don't want it just to sort of floor it from the get-go. So that is delicate adjustments. So let's install. All right, sorry about the noise. It's raining very heavily at the moment. There's crazy summer storms. I've been sweating all afternoon in the car. Believe it or not, there's actually 3 days work of stuffing around with the wiring and all that sort of stuff, trying to sort this stuff out, and really not a lot to show for it, to be honest. Visually, the car doesn't really look much different, except there's an extra stalk in there now. It's all wired up, so now it's time to go back to Link and just get it all set up so that hopefully we can get it to work. And we will have cruise control and a map sensor in the car, getting ready to take it back to the dyno. I know this was a pretty boring one because it's not really, wiring is never very interesting. Come on. So loud. This is not going to get any better. like and subscribe. Join us on Patreon to watch videos a day early, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. See you next time.